write a great research paper and get accepted by a good journal. And this is presented by myself and also Christina today. And in our agenda today, firstly, I will introduce I'll give you an STM publishing overview and how to plan your article. And Christina will show you how to choose the right journal and editorial and publication process and talk about what preprints are. And if we have time, we'll have a Q&A session. So first, STM does scientific, technical, and medical publishing overview. So Elsevier has served the global research community and published over 560,000 peer-reviewed articles in 2020, which is 90% more than a decade ago, accounting for almost 18% of the global research output. And the current system of STMJ publishing has evolved over hundreds of years and served science and medical global communities. The industry is highly competitive. It's around 2,000 publishing organizations annually publish 20,000 scholarly journals and 1.2 to 1.4 articles from approximately 5.4 million researchers worldwide. This is the world's research output by subject area analysis based on 2018 to 2021 data from Elsevier. Medicine is the biggest subject area and follows by engineering and computer science. And here's analysis based on research output from Africa. Medicine, engineering, and computer science are still the three biggest subject areas. Elsevier is a very powerful tool and allow us to deep dive into the performance of specific subject areas, institutions, and researchers. What role does scientific publishing play in research? It serves as a means to the officially timestamped scientific results, enabling us to determine who should be credited for specific discoveries. Certifies those results through the use of peer review, ensuring the validity and integrity of submissions. Disseminates those discoveries and findings to be shared with the broader scientific community. Finally, it preserves the minutes and record for posterity. These original four roles of the publisher have endured for over 300 years to the present day. Although we may have used different methods to carry out these roles, they remain fundamentally unchanged. So let's talk about how to plan your article now. First, you need to ask yourself, are you ready to publish? You should not consider publishing yet if your work is outdated because it will be duplicating previously published work, or if your conclusions are incorrect or not acceptable. These points are good indicators that your report lacks scientific interest or does not substantially advance the field. You should consider publishing your research if you have information that advances the understanding in the specific research field. This could take the form of presenting new original results or methods, rationalizing, refining, or reinterpreting results, or reviewing or summarizing a particular subject or field. Remember that a strong manuscript is crucial in order to present your contribution to the scientific community. So make sure when you consider publishing when you feel you're ready. There are various types of manuscript that suit different purposes. Full-length articles are the most frequent type. These are the often substantial, complete, and comprehensive pieces of research that are of significance. Letters or short communications are quick and early communications of advances. These tend to be much more brief than the full-length articles. Review papers, summarize recent developments on a specific topic, highlighting important points that have been previously reported and introducing no new information. These are often submitted after invitation by an editor. Before selecting an article type for your manuscript, you should first evaluate your work. Ask yourself the following questions. Is my message sufficient for a full article? Are my results so thrilling that they should be shown as soon as possible in a short communication? Your supervisor or colleagues are a good resource for advice on manuscript types. And now we have new types of manuscripts. These are always these new types of manuscripts are used for describing methods, data sets, and impact of software. You can find these manuscript types along with traditional manuscript types in some journals or in dedicated journals, such as MethodX, Data in Brief, and Software X. So again, ask your supervisor and colleagues for choosing the most suitable manuscript type for your paper. So manuscript contains many sections, and each one has a have different purposes. So we can split into 3 sections to discuss. At the beginning, title, abstract, and keywords, which play important roles in showing the article to be easily found, indexed, and searching. Make sure they are informative, attractive, and effective. The next section is the main section of your article: introduction, methods, results, and discussion. This is where you present your work and convey the main message and findings to the community. Make sure your message is clear. Readers' time is not unlimited. Make the article as concise as possible. The last section is conclusion, acknowledgement, references, and supporting material. These are just artificial groups. Some journals request discussion section to be combined with the conclusion or results. Others need it to be an independent section. So there are different arrangements of the order. So check the guide for author of your target journal carefully when you prepare your article. Let's look at the process of building an article. The sequence of writing the article is not the same as reading it. For most scientific fields, the most effective way is regard manuscript as a whole and build it brick by brick. You start with producing your tables and figures with captions and legends. Then you describe the methods used, results found, and the discussion around these results. The conclusion should flow fairly easily. Then you write the introduction as to where your work fits into the field as a whole. Finally, you write a title, abstract, and keywords. This process of building the article is much easier, more logical, and more effective than trying to write an article in the sequence it is read. So now let's look at each section and what it contains. Start with the title. There are certain characteristics of effective titles. And these are: attract the reader's attention, contain the fewest possible words, adequately describe content, be informative but concise, identify main issue. Don't use jargons and abbreviations, but use formal language. It's advisable to discuss the title with your co-authors. Remember, editors and readers don't like titles that make no sense or fail to represent the subject matter adequately, and more importantly, you want the appropriate audience to read your paper. If the title isn't accurate, then the right people may not read your paper, and the community may not be aware of your work. So we talk about the authors. It's very important for us to understand authorship. The general principle for who should be listed. First author is generally the person who contributes the most to the paper, conducts and supervises the data analysis, and the proper presentation interpretation of the result, puts the paper together and submit the paper to the journal. Co-authors are who contribute to the paper, make the intellectual contribution to the data analysis, or contribute to data interpretation, and they should review each paper draft, and they must be able to present the result, defend the implication, and discussion study limitations. Sometimes corresponding author can be the first author, or sometimes it's a senior author from the institution. You should always avoid ghost authors. Ghost author means who have contributed to the work but was left out from the author list. And you should also avoid gift authorship. That means including authors who did not contribute to the work. And you must be consistent in how you write the author names. If you feel you need more information, Elsevier policies and guidelines can be found on our elsevier.com page. And we also have authorship training module in the Researcher Academy platform. Now let's look at the keywords. Keywords are labels and tags for your manuscript and are often used by indexing and abstracting services. Avoid words that have four meanings. Keywords should be specific to give someone a very quick idea about the content of your paper, and only use abbreviations that is well established, such as DNA. Check the guide for authors for specifics on on the keywords, on what kind of keywords and how many keywords should be used for your target journal. If we look at the example on the screen as an article title, an experimental study on evacuated tube solar sectors, collector using supercritical CO2. Solar collector, supercritical CO2, solar energy, solar thermal utilization would be effective keywords. If the title catches the reader's attention, the next thing they check is the abstract. The abstract is freely available in electronic abstracting and indexing services, such as PubMed, Mainline, Scopus. So the abstract should be a single paragraph summarizing the problem, the methods, the results, and the conclusion. The abstract acts as an advertisement for your work. Since it is freely available by online searching and indexing, you want to make it as catchy and accurate as possible to have the greatest impact. An abstract written clearly will strongly encourage the reader to read the rest of your paper, and the abstract should be as brief as possible. Take the time to write the abstract very carefully. Many authors write the abstract last, so it accurately reflects the content of the paper. The introduction is used to avoid context for your manuscript and convince readers why your work advances the field of study. Be concise in the introduction, but give the reader enough information to understand why the work is important. Introduction of letters can be shorter, sometimes only one paragraph. Next session shouldn't be a history lesson, but you do need to introduce the main finding of your work. So provide a brief context to the reader. Address the problem, identify the solution and limitations, identify what the work is trying to achieve, and provide perspective consistent with the nature of the journal. Write a unique introduction for every article. Please do not reuse your introductions. The method section describes how you study the problem. It is important to be detailed. It is very important and should be able, so for the readers, they should be able to reproduce the experiment. Any previously published procedures shouldn't be rewritten in detail. They can be noted in the references or described in the supporting materials section. The equipment and materials used in experiments should be identified along with their sources if there is a chance for variability of quality of these items. If the work is computational or theoretical code, computational or analytical methods should be described too. And if your work involves experiments on human or animal, it must follow applicable ethics standards, such as the most recent version of the Helsinki Declaration or relevant animal experimentation guidelines. Approval of a local ethics committee is required and should always be specified at this point in the manuscript, covering letter, or the online submission system. However, even approval of the local ethics committee does not guarantee that the editors will also agree that the work was done in an acceptable manner. So editors make their own judgment and decision on ethics. Moving on to the results section. This is where you describe the important results of your research. You should present the results that are essential to the discussion, which means the only data of primary important. You can use subheadings to keep results of the same type together, and you should be clear. They should be clear and easy to understand for readers, and you should highlight the main findings and feature expected findings, provides statistical analysis, and include illustration and figures. Graphics are often used to compare experimental results with those of previous works or with calculated theoretical values. Graphs should not appear crowded. Try to present at most 3 to 4 data sets per figure. Use well-selected scales, label and axes clearly, and use different symbols so that readers can quickly discriminate between the data sets. And for the tables, do not include long, boring table unless absolutely necessary, and make them easy to read as possible. Every photo or image should be presented with a scale marker, and the resolution should be clear. For the discussion section is where you interpret your results. And this is the most important section of the article. This is where you get a chance to sell your data. A huge number of manuscripts are rejected because the discussion is weak and only include mere descriptions of the result. Make sure this discussion corresponds to and complements the results, but do not simply repeat the results here. Compare other published results with your own one, and do not ignore words in disagreement with yours. Confront it and convince the reader that you are correct or better. And be careful not to use statements that go beyond what the result can support, or non-specific expressions such as higher temperature or at a lower rate. Use quantitative descriptions. Don't use new terms or not already defined or mentioned, something not defined, mentioned in your paper. And do not use speculations on possible interpretations based on imagination. The conclusion is used to show how your work advances the field of study. Be clear in the conclusion that will help the reviewer and editor judge your work and its impact. Provide clear justifications for the work you did and how your work advances the field. And this can be achieved by indicating uses, extensions, or applications of the work. Suggest future experiments that build on your work and point out any relevant experiments that may already be underway. The acknowledgement section includes the names of the important entities you want to acknowledge, such as your advisors, financial supporters, and proofreaders. The reference list is where you cite the main scientific publications on which you base your research on. So you do not want to include too many references, especially if they are not really relevant to your work. Always ensure you have fully absorbed and understand the materials you are referencing. And you want to avoid excessive self-citations of your own work or from your same institution. And check the guide for author to ensure that check the guide for author of your target journal to ensure the to make sure you follow the proper format. Presentation in the correct format is the responsibility of the author, it's not the editor. So make the editor's work easier and they will appreciate your effort. So the language you should use for your manuscript is clear, objective, accurate, concise. Always read journals guide for authors for additional language specifications. Some journals they may request only American English. Some journals accept American English or in British English, as long as you're consistent. And you need to be, you should write direct and short sentences. Avoid long sentences because some long sentences confuse readers. One idea or piece of information per sentence is sufficient. Avoid multiple statements in one sentence. And use present tense for known facts and hypotheses. Past tense for experiments you have conducted. Past tense when you describe the result of an experiment. And use active voice to shorten your sentences. Avoid abbreviations and eliminate unnecessary redundant phrases. So here I am presenting the differences between thesis and articles. Understanding the differences can help you turn your paper into an article. But these are just some primary distinctions, and journals have their own standards and requirements. So please check the guide for author of your target journal carefully when you prepare your work. So thank you very much. This concludes my part. Now I'll be handing over to Christina for the following parts. Chris, over to you.
Now you are muted, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you.
No
Thank you, Lantis, and I hope everybody can now see my screen. I'm going to take you through starting with selecting a journal for your paper. And let's see if we can get this page down. So a best practice for selecting a journal, it's really, really important to select a journal that your work will reach the intended audience. So if your paper is outside the scope of a journal, it's most likely, or not most likely, it will definitely be rejected immediately by the editors. Not necessarily because of the quality of the work, just because of the fact that the topic doesn't fit within the scope of that journal. So you really want to make sure that you consider that when selecting that journal. Also, be honest with yourself about the aims and potential impact of your work. You don't want to simply start with the highest quality journal and work your way down, since that diminishes the credibility with the editors and reviewers, and also delays the actual publication of your paper, since it's then going to have to be resubmitted to another journal and you'll have to begin the process all over again. It's also important that you do not gamble by submitting your manuscript to more than one journal at a time. Simultaneous submissions are prohibited and by international ethics standards. So and editors do find out if there are multiple submissions of an article simultaneously. So definitely do not do that. And also, generally, authors are required to tick a box at the time of submitting an article, so stating that the manuscript is not currently under consideration for publication in another journal. Next, for selecting a journal, consider talking to your supervisor or colleagues. They can provide you, excuse me, with good suggestions. Also remember, your supervisor, who may often be your co-author, has co-responsibility for your work. So ask them for help. And again, colleagues, when you're deciding where to submit, they may be more familiar with the different journals that are relevant to your field. Also investigate all the candidate journals to find out their aims and scopes. Once you have that short list, you really want to dig down deeper into that journal, understand the accepted types of articles, readership, current hot topics, look at that author guideline, which will give you tips on that journal. We also have Journal Finder tool. This allows you to enter your working title, your abstract, keywords, and then you would hit select the field of research that you think would be appropriate or is appropriate for your journal article, and it would provide you with a list of candidates journals that you can then look at more closely to determine if that would be the appropriate place to submit. And as I said earlier, the guide for authors, this is a listing of everything that you would need to know about the journal and what the expectations are. It includes items such as the scope of papers that they accept, the type of papers. Not every journal would accept the ones earlier listed out by Lantis. Some only accept letters, some are just reviews. So really look and see what the description is and what types of articles they accept. Also, look at the expectations before you start writing your article. It's important for you to look at this guide for authors, because you don't want to get once you've decided upon a journal, or you think you know what journal or the type of article you're going to write, you don't want to get too far along in writing that article and then find out that they have specific parameters of structure and references, and it just adds additional work for you. So really take the time to look through these guides for authors. Many people select journals just based upon impact factor or site scores. These metrics can give you a general guide, but should not be the sole reason to choose a journal. Impact factor and site score indicate how many times the most recent papers in a journal are cited on average in a given year. And they can be influenced by editorial policies of journals and turnover of research. So this should not be the only parameter you use. It's certainly helpful to see a high impact factor or high site score, but should not be the only consideration. Just to touch upon the topic of predatory journals. So no one is immune to predatory journals. Hundreds of thousands of researchers have fallen prey to them, going from renowned research institutes, even a Nobel laureate. Predatory journals actively solicit manuscripts and charge publication fees without necessarily providing the robust peer review or other editorial services one would expect. Some practices by these journals can include promising non-existent peer review, fake impact factors, fake editors, and sometimes even have misleading journal names that are really similar to well-known legitimate journals. It's really important to educate yourself on the journals out there. There's a site, Think, Check, Submit. It's a cross-industry initiative, and individual publishers, along with representatives from various libraries and institutions, as well as publishers, and gives simple guidelines for how to assess a journal before submitting. Also, Elsevier's Researcher Academy has a module on finding, on how to find an appropriate journal. Next, editorial and publication process. We'll take you through what that looks like. So let's look at this illustration of the publication cycle that we follow here at Elsevier. These give you an idea of just how large the number of submissions are to our journals. Elsevier publishes nearly 2,200 journals, as Lantis explained at the beginning, including journals like the Lancet and Cell, and over 25,000 book titles, including a number of iconic reference works. We have submitted 12.6 million articles, are currently archived in our system. And depending on the journal, on average, 30 to 60% are rejected directly by one of the 13,000 editors they work with. So when I say are rejected directly, that means as soon as they're submitted, we call that a desk rejection, that many times those articles aren't necessarily rejected. They don't go through peer review. And many times those rejections are a result of being out of scope, not of the quality level expected from that particular journal. Currently, articles that aren't rejected up front will undergo peer review. Currently, we work with around 560,000 reviewers to evaluate these articles. And of these, around half of those get accepted after minor to major revision. Also, just to speak about rejections, they go across the board, and you should not, if you do get rejected, take heart. I've had editors of journals where they've submitted to their own journal and been rejected. So it's very common to be rejected to a journal, and just understand that, rework it and continue on. Overall, 365,000 articles are in the end accepted by the editors each year and produced, which means typeset, posted online, linked to the various external platforms such as PubMed, and promoted to the appropriate audience, and of course, archived for future use. 12.6 million articles are now available and have been downloaded over 700 million times by 11 million researchers across more than 120 countries. So you can see that it's a fairly robust ecosystem of articles and submissions. So peer review. After managing the submission of articles, the peer review process can begin. The quality and speed of reviews are important to both authors and readers. And the purpose of peer review has become to filter that is used to evaluate the quality, comment on the validity, judge the significance, and determine originality of research. The process also helps to improve the quality of the paper. In a recent study by the Publishing Research Consortium, over 90% of authors agreed that peer review improved the quality of their paper. Publishers, we facilitate the review process by investing in and developing and maintaining online review systems, but really that peer review is owned by the editors of those specific journals. Types of peer review. There's 3 different types that can occur. One is single blind, which is the author doesn't know the identity of the reviewer. These have pros and cons. Actually, all 3 of these have pros and cons. For single blind, the advantage is that the anonymity of the reviewer protects the ability to provide honest feedback without any fear of retribution or criticism. It also allows for the knowledge of the author and their previous work to provide context. And it allows an assessment of the author's conflicts of interest. The cons is that knowledge of who the author is may sometimes positively or negatively affect that review. And so there's a certain degree of potential for discrimination. A double-blind review is when the reviewer doesn't know the identity of the author and the author doesn't know the identity of the reviewer. And the pros in this case is the research is judged fairly and without bias. The reviewer and author are both protected from criticism that can affect them later. But the disadvantage is that, knowledge of the author's identity could help the reviewer make a more informed decision. And depending on the field and subject, even though we say it's a double blind, the reviewer or author can still figure out who the other author, the other individual is, just based upon the fact that many fields, it's a very small community. Open review is when the identity of the author and reviewer is known by all participants throughout the process. And that the advantage is that it allows for transparency, it fosters accountability, the reviews are improved by a higher level of civility. If you're speaking directly to somebody and they know that you're speaking directly to them, and the reviewers are motivated since their name is attached. The disadvantage is that many reviewers refuse to participate in open peer review because of concerns that it could affect their career or relationships negatively, especially when you are criticizing or evaluating a colleague or friend's paper, or even somebody that you report into, for instance. Once those reviews are done, we have our decisions, and the decisions could vary from a minor revision to a major revision. So a minor revision is basically the manuscript is worth being published. Some elements in that manuscript might need some clarification, maybe some restructuring, shortened, as Lanta's mentioned, being concise in how you're presenting the information, or expanded, sometimes, although rarely, asking for more detail. They must ask for some textual adaptations to be done. Now, a minor revision doesn't guarantee acceptance after revision, but generally it's certainly a good indication that most probably it will be accepted, assuming those changes are made correctly. When responding to reviews, the best way to approach those reviews are to create a chart listing all the responses and all the suggestions, and make sure that when you resubmit a paper that you address all of those queries. And you really want to make sure that you're polite in your responses as well. Now, for a major revision, your paper may be worth being published, but there's significant deficiencies that have to be accepted or addressed before acceptance. And for those, it could involve significant textual modifications, sometimes even additional experiments to further vet your findings. So again, when getting these comments and reviews back and the requests for major, minor, or sometimes moderate revisions, make sure that you address every single comment made. Next would be the production and dissemination. Once a paper has been accepted, you've resubmitted with your changes, and then you've gotten acceptance of your paper. Then it goes through the next phase, which is one, you could do a manuscript. You need to go through the copy editing, author proofing, preparation for publishing. And the copy editing, that goes through our production system. They will go through, clean up any variations, send those proofs back to the authors with queries, and have you evaluate and make sure that the changes are appropriate that they've suggested. And then once you've validated those proofs, then we prepare it for publishing, which is the layout for the for actually appearing on the journal or on our journal homepage. And that includes logos, doing pagination, and branding and so forth. And then it's also posted onto our electronic warehouse. Our journals, some are still published as print, but the vast majority are online now. Now, preprints are submitted manuscripts that are prior to all of these changes and actually prior to reviews. So let's next, I'll talk about open access publishing as well. Open access is increasingly popular way to publish academic and scientific research. In 2021, more than 11 million articles were tagged as open access in Scopus. So we're committed to making every OA publishing experience with us as fast, efficient, and positive as possible. To publish an OA article in your chosen journal, authors pay an article publication fee, but sometimes those fees are waived and with transformative agreements. Sometimes your institution might have funding available. So it's always important to check, and for getting additional information on open access fee waivers, you are able to click on a journal on the guide for authors to get additional information on where those waivers might be, or what those fees are. It also lists out where those fees are. Some journals publish only open access. Other journals are considered hybrid journals, which you have the option of having it either be subscription or open access. The advantage of open access is that it's freely available for everybody to read. So, many people are shifting towards that type of a model. So tips when submitting to a journal: take your time with your journal selection. Really read through those author guidelines to have a very good feel for where you should be submitting. Consider submitting a brief report or short communication. Language editing, you want to make sure that those journal that you're going to submit to, do have those services, that they are going to, in production, do that production cycle of actually going through your article. You could reach out to the editor-in-chief or associate editors. Sometimes they're willing to give you a little bit more guidance prior to officially submitting. If your work requires ethics committee approval or COI disclosures, make sure you have them before submission. And also tell a clear, concise, and logical story and provide context in your journal article. Preprints. So preprints are early versions of research papers. They're shared ahead of formal peer review, and they provide key benefits to researchers, though there's still some concern that exists about the preprints. The benefits are that it can accelerate science. Authors can stake a claim to their findings before being formally accepted into a journal for publication. For early career researchers, it can help to build their CV. feedback from the research community can enhance that paper before you're actually submitting it to a journal for formal publication. So it's almost like an early vetting process. And it may increase online attention and citations eventually once the paper is actually published in a journal. The potential risks to researchers is that there might be a fear that someone else scoops that idea and publishes earlier, concerns that it reduces the chances of being published, the principal concerns about sharing non-peer-reviewed research. I think we've seen that, of late when people were trying to really get out information, especially with the COVID crisis. So trying to have people understand that it hasn't been peer reviewed, it's an early finding, but trying to get that data and information out as quickly as possible. So the fear of public negative comments on research prior to its actual publication in a journal, and so that's a concern as well. And low adoption of preprints in some domains can limit those benefits. So Elsevier's preprint policy is that for most Elsevier owned journals, that authors can share their preprint anywhere at any time. Once accepted for publication, we encourage authors to link from the preprint to their formal publication via its digital object identifier, and every article has this DOI link that's given. Millions of researchers have access to the formal publication on ScienceDirect, so the links will help your users to find, access, cite, and use the best available version of that article and that content. And authors can update their preprints on some preprint servers with their accepted manuscripts, but that could vary from journal to journal. So always check what those policies are on that guide for authors. Oops. Also, sorry, let's move up. Considerations, preprints receive their own DOIs, which can dilute citations if the earlier version of the paper is cited versus the published version. You run the risk of incorrect, unvetted information spreading before you have a chance to publish your peer-reviewed article. If there's a need for accelerated research, that's something to consider. And also, lay audience is not able to assess the validity of the research, such as safety, patient safety problems. So those are other considerations if you're thinking of posting a preprint. Publishing ethics. The most serious issues to avoid in publishing ethics are fabrication, which is when the researcher makes up data. Falsification is when the data collected is manipulated to fit certain trends. Plagiarism is when work previously done or reports previously written are taken and passed off as one's own work. A caveat to this plagiarism, sometimes it is your own work, but if it was published previously someplace else, you need to note that. These three violations are the most common forms of ethical misconduct that the scientific and publishing communities are challenged with and trying to address. Plagiarism, most common, in sample cases of reported to Elsevier journals back in 2012, 46% involved plagiarism. While next was duplicate submissions or publications of the same article in more than one journal. So plagiarism is considered a very serious offense by your institution, the journal editors, and by the scientific community as a whole. And it can result in academic charges and will certainly cause the rejection of your paper. So it can hurt your reputation in that scientific community. So always be very, very cautious and vigilant in your papers. So what can be plagiarized? It could be words, ideas, findings, diagrams, illustrations, printed material, and also, again, any original work, including your own previously published work. So if you need to cite that work, if your copyright is given over to another journal, you need to get permission in some instances, especially for things like illustrations. So always be very cautious in making sure that you appropriately cite and get permissions where needed. Because what happens is that, if there is a case of plagiarism, once a paper is published, it's out there. There is no pulling it down off the internet. What happens is this is what it looks like. This article of which an author committed plagiarism, it's on Science Direct, it stays there, and instead it shows it as being retracted. So for all the world to know. So it's really, really important for somebody to be vigilant in ensuring that they're not, there is no cause for a concern about potential plagiarized material. So avoid unethical behavior by confirming authorship. Double check your in-text citations and references. A rule of thumb with citing text is quotations for direct passages. Don't paraphrase. Always include in your references. Send your paper to only one journal at a time, and keep self-citations to a minimum. And here's on our website, Elsevier for Authors, you can get a lot more information. It helps to provide you with additional guidance on what's considered plagiarism, how to avoid it. Also, the Researcher Academy can take you through many different modules that, again, can help to educate and answer additional questions on that. And so here's ethics modules on Researcher Academy, and some questions I saw popping up about authorship and how to do that appropriately. That's it for me. And I think we have a few moments left for questions. Thank you, everybody.
So much, Christina, for that presentation. We do have a few questions in Q&A. I will read them out, and if you or Lancis want to answer, you can just indicate. I'll start at the beginning. Will it be considered plagiarism if your research paper was only submitted academically for grading?
If it's not previously published, it wouldn't be considered plagiarism, no, as long as it's your own paper.
Will an article written from thesis or dissertation not be regarded as being plagiarized?
No, it won't be. If your thesis is not published in a previous publishing a journal, then it won't be. But the thesis, the article will only be a small part in your thesis. So it's like difference. You cannot just publish the entire thesis in a journal, because the format and the requirements are different.
Could you please throw more light on what you mean by do not paraphrase?
So I think in paraphrase, sometimes instead of, you need to make a statement your own. So when somebody takes a sentence and just kind of rewords it, but it's pretty much the exact same sentence, but maybe you just, swapped out an adjective in there, that would be paraphrasing. And you need to be, you need to take that idea and then put it into your own structure and your own idea, if that makes any sense.
Thank you. Please expand on the benefits of submitting a brief report or short communication and what this entails.
The short report is when, like, you feel this, you want to, so short report, short communication normally is a shorter version of the article. You want to prepare it really fast and publish it really quickly to announce your finding to the community. So if you feel this is necessary and the best for your work, then you should consider short communication or short report.
Thank you. My colleague and I submitted and presented at a conference last year. Can we submit the article to a journal for publication?
I think proceeding articles generally only include abstracts. So normally a journal article will be a more extensive version of the proceeding papers. So you can check the where you publish your proceedings and the guideline, and also your target journal, the author guideline, to see if that's acceptable.
Can an already published article on subscription basis in a credible journal be requested in future to be an open access article?
Can it be requested to be? I mean, you could certainly request, but the problem is that, you know, once a paper is published and it's already in that book, it's like in a book, even though it's online, it's already been sold. But sometimes, depending upon the journal, some journals have, after a certain amount of time, have those articles go open access. So really, you know, look at that. You'll have to look at it on a journal by journal basis, because there is a variation, and there's a huge variation on how those are set up.
Thank you. What are the advantages of publishing open access? What are the advantages of publishing in open access journals or articles over a journal or article which is not open access?
I mean, for open access, it means that, you know, everybody has that article is accessible to everyone. The disadvantage is that you have to pay. So the burden of paying for that article falls on to the author or your institution. And as I said, on my presentation, my portion about open access is there's a lot of different agreements out there now. It's the industry or open access is shifting, the policies are shifting, seems like monthly, but certainly, constantly changing. So, that's the advantage. The advantage of subscription is that when you have a broad reach, like our Science Direct platform, so many people subscribe to that already that you still have a broad audience, and people can also purchase that article piecemeal. So just because you don't, they might not have a subscription to that particular journal, they can still access that article.
If you don't agree with the reviewer's comments, can you withdraw and submit to a different journal?
So yeah, if you follow a process to withdraw your article, that means your submission at this journal is completed. Then you can take your article to another journal.
Okay. Do all journals require that the results be compared with the results from previous work?
Do they, you mean within the paper, do they require that? You should always, when you're writing an article, you should not be, you should be referencing any similar results or similar findings. You can't just, if you're doing something, you can't just forget about anybody else that has done something similar. And that becomes part of that review process, because those reviewers are going to know that something similar, or there are other results out there, so that they have to be included in some way, whether it's a reference or something, because then it kind of questions the validity of your finding if you don't include that. So you want to be able to show that you've considered everything.
Looking for your opinion about inclusion of keywords that have already been used in the title or abstract.
Yes, you can include those. So if you have your paper's on Mars, you can put Mars as a keyword. That's fine. Yeah. but you don't want to just use those because obviously you should have other concepts within your paper. And many journals have a list of keywords, potential keywords.
So people contribute equally to a manuscript. How do you show this as authorship, as only one person, and who can be the first author? So I think there's a few questions on how the order of authors works. If you could share some comments on that.
So to be fair, the author list should be agreed among all the co-authors. So it depends on the journal policy. Most journals only accept one first author. In that case, I think that all the co-authors should discuss and agree on the order and how they prefer it to present it in when the article is published. And so now most journals will request during the submission process, the contribution of each author need to be specified. And some journals will access this, but majority of journals will respect the list provided by the authors. So it's just a common agreement among all the authors.
Francis, would you be able to make suggestions on how to split work, say a PhD, into multiple articles? So how much can or should be included in one article?
I think it means enough to support your finding and be like significant findings of the work. Then that will be enough for an article. Yeah, and I would suggest the author should check the previous publications of the journal to see what all the articles published by this journal look like. They will give them an idea what should be included in the article when they submit to the journal.
Okay, I think just one last question as we are already out of time, if you wouldn't mind. Just to comment on, if you can comment on this, it's about the licensing types of bold open access. So the question is, can you explain the different licensing types? Creative Commons attribution, non-commercial, no derivative works, 4.0, international license, Creative Commons attribution, international license. So maybe if you just want to give an overview of these types, if you're comfortable with that.
I would say your best bet, because it is pretty complex. It's not a quick, short answer. So I would suggest maybe we could share with you a reference to go to where it has a description of each of those. Yeah.
I think that will be best as well.
Yeah.
So with that, I think we'll close the Q&A. We managed to answer most of the questions. The ones that we weren't able to cover, we will reach out to you with an answer. There's about 21 in the Q&A box. So thank you for submitting all your questions. Thanks to the audience for joining us. And most importantly, thank you to our two presenters for this wonderful presentation. It was very clear and informative. And we do appreciate you presenting to South Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa today. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.